You could be the key to helping change lives. Join a clinical trial with Nucleus Network in Minneapolis and be a part of groundbreaking research. Nucleus Network has been conducting clinical research studies for over 15 years. Right now, Nucleus Network is looking for people with moderate to severe kidney impairment to participate in their upcoming clinical studies. If eligible, your participation could help advance research of investigational medications that are being developed to treat a variety of medical conditions. Nucleus Network is offering compensation ranging from $2,000 to $7,000 for study participation time. If you or someone you know has kidney disease, check your eligibility for Nucleus Network's upcoming studies now at nucleusnetwork.com. Your participation matters. Learn more about Nucleus at nucleusnetwork.com. Again, nucleusnetwork.com.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Watson and the co-host of Foreplay.
I'm your co-host, George Fowler, former firefighter, your couples therapist who loves to talk about sex.
Woo! Let's discuss everything about the best sexual techniques to building your emotional intimacy, which is really necessary for great sex.
We bring sound, concrete tools to reframe your relationship problems and learn how to fall in love again and feel desire.
Listen to Foreplay Radio on the iHeart app, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everybody, welcome to Marriage Therapy Radio. I'm Zach Brittle. I'm here with Laura Heck. Today we're talking about flooding and specifically what to do when one or both partners is prone to escalate during conflict. But before we get to that, I want to remind you about our upcoming breakfast club or book club. We haven't decided what to name it, but we're reading Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel. And so far I'm pleasantly surprised by the book and I'm looking forward to discussing it with you. We had a really cool conversation with a handful of folks in December, and February looks like it's going to be really cool. You can learn more about that at marriagetherapyradio.com. I think later in this episode, we also plug our video course, which is called Marriage in Motion. You can check that out at marriagetherapyradio.com. But for now, we're going to have a really cool conversation. Stick around.
Good morning.
Hi. Yeah. It is morning, and I am here for you because I know how important mornings are for you, even though I wanted to still be asleep right now.
Yeah. I don't think you were actually sleeping though. I think you were. So here's what happened, guys. Zach and I have a perpetual conflict in our friendship and it's never going to go away. And he gets little bits and pieces of what it's like to be married to me when I text him and I'm like, hey, let's record this podcast. Time's a wasting. Yeah. Sunshine is going away. So he sends me a picture and he said, leave me alone. I'm sleeping. And it's literally just a picture of him, he and his wife, Rebecca, snuggling in bed. And that honestly, like kind of made my blood boil a little bit. Cause I'm like, my time is very important. And I feel like my time, like you're not taking my time seriously.
Yeah. We could get into this right now, but I'm not going to, because I think there might be people who are listening to us for the first time and we really are friends. We really do.
We are. There's really a wax and a wane.
But I'm not all that concerned about your scheduling emergencies. You. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very concerned about
I have yours. An emergency. What? I've got stuff to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Okay. I do. Yeah. I need to go run.
You know, there's a thing that you can do where you arrange the order of the stuff.
Okay.
So you can do stuff later. Like you can do some stuff that you think that you need to do. You can do it now and then later.
I don't want to. Yeah. I like to get it all off my plate so that I am free and clear and I can have playtime. But anyway, we're here. And for those of you who are listening to us for the very first time, Zach's in Seattle. I'm in Bend, Oregon. And this is our weekly date with each other where we look at each other and we talk about things that matter in our practice as couples therapists and matter in our life and our marriages. And so that's what we do.
I had my annual date this week.
Yes. So how did you do that? So tell our listeners a little bit about, because you just celebrated an anniversary, right?
Sort of.
Like what year is this?
January 11th is our anniversary. It's more important than our wedding anniversary. It's the anniversary of our first date, which was in 1997. So it's that. You do math and I'll keep telling this story. Okay. So in 1997, we went to the Olive Garden for dinner. And then we went to a movie called The American President, which was cool. It's a good movie. I'm glad we went to a good movie.
Can I tell you something real fast? I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah.
I didn't understand this. And I wonder, this is how I think like the world is listening to us just a little bit, like Amazon, Netflix. But on my Netflix account, at the very top where it kind of like promotes new shows and whatever.
Yeah.
Is this with Michael Douglas?
Yeah, totally.
I'm not even joking, but The American President has been promoted to me as a movie that I need to watch. It's like, you might be interested in The American President.
I've seen it 27 times.
Yeah. Well, I've never seen it once, but apparently Netflix thinks I need to watch it, probably because they know we're friends.
You're supposed to say, why have you seen it 27 times?
Oh, Zach, why have you seen The American President 27 times?
Because on January 11th, 1997, we met in 96. Our first date was in 96. And then in 97,
yeah,
we got engaged on that day. And to celebrate, we went to the Olive Garden and we rented a VHS of The American President. Do you remember what a VHS is? Have you ever seen it?
I do. Yeah. I've seen them. Okay. Thank you. I'm 36 years old. I'm a grown-ass woman.
Then every year since then, we have eaten Olive Garden and watched The American President. And it's been crazy because we've had to adapt. A couple times Rebecca's been out of town, or for whatever reason, our schedules didn't work. This year there was COVID, so we couldn't go to the Olive Garden. So we just got takeout. We ate it at our house.
How was that?
It was great. I mean, Olive Garden's great if you eat it once a year.
Sure.
I mean,
it's such a treat. Like, if you can gorge yourself on 19 breadsticks and salad and soup, then you're great.
Sometimes we go there and I'm in awe of people who eat there like regularly. Like, this is their thing, which is fine. Because it was my thing one time.
Before I met my husband, the Olive Garden was the fanciest restaurant I had ever eaten at. I know. I'm not even, if for some people that is the fanciest restaurant. And for me, it really was. That was like where we went when my mom graduated from grad school.
One time
to celebrate.
We went to the Olive Garden and the guy, the waiter comes up and he has the little cheese grater thing. And he's like, how much cheese do you want? And he was churning the cheese. And there was a table next to us that was like full of, let's just say, dateable girls for him.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And he could not have cared less about us at all. So he never heard us tell him when to stop doing the cheese because he was looking at them. And then when he was done with the cheese, he literally took the cheese grater thing and put it into the salad. Like, he just laid it down on top of the salad and he walked away. So we have an authentic Olive Garden cheese grater.
You took it with you?
Of course. Yeah. He gave it to us as an anniversary gift.
He did give it to you. Yeah. There's a couple of times when things have made their way into my purse as a gift from the restaurant that I was at. Happy birthday to me.
I have a very, very cool fork that I got this summer on San Juan Island.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, that's
nice. I couldn't resist. It was such a cool fork that I need.
I love that we are completely
confessing to crimes.
True crimes with Zach and Laura.
Shoplifting on Marriage Therapy Radio.
Okay, what did we want to talk about? Because wait,
I want to ask you one more thing.
Okay.
Have you ever done this thing called intermittent fasting?
Yes, I'm actually doing it right now, which is probably why I was super cranky with you via text message this morning.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I'm doing that now too. I learned about it this year and I decided I'm going to try it out. I just need somebody to explain it to me because all I know is I'm not eating from 8 to noon.
This is probably going to be a super punchy episode because both of us are in a fasting mode at the moment and a little lightheaded.
Maybe I only fast from 10 p.m. to 9 a.m.
Yeah, well, that's easy because that's when you're sleeping.
Yeah, that's not.
My stomach, hold on. If it growls again, I'm going to try and move the microphone so you can hear my stomach growling because I am currently in a fast. And that's why I probably needed to get out the door and run this morning is to do a fasted exercise, a fasted run. You know, Zach and I are huge fans of getting support, especially during abnormally stressful times like these. This is why we have partnered with BetterHelp to put you in contact with licensed professional counselors in your area. Tap into the world's largest network of licensed, accredited, and experienced counselors who can help you with a range of issues, including depression, anxiety, relationships, trauma, grief, and more. With BetterHelp's counselors, you get the same professionalism and quality that you would expect from an in-office counselor counselor, but with the ability to communicate when and how you want. The matching process is quick but thorough, and you have the ability to communicate with your therapist how you like it, whether it be messaging, over the phone, or video conferencing. I know that in-person therapy sessions aren't feasible right now, and a lot of therapists are booked out, but don't let that stop you from getting the support that you need. The cost is less than half of what Zach and I charge, which is kind of unheard of. And when you register with BetterHelp, you're supporting Marriage Therapy Radio. Go to trybetterhelp.com/MTR to register. Try TRY better BETTER help. HELP.com/MTR to register with BetterHelp. Hey, what are we talking about? Because you had something specific you wanted to bring up today.
Well, I've just been thinking a lot for two reasons about flooding and what's it called? Diffuse physiological arousal. Like when we get so escalated that we kind of lose our mind. I realized it because Rebecca and I got into this thing the other day about our kids, and both of us started
yelling. That you dropped your voice and got like a tiny bit quieter because you're actually at home, and I think you're like, is she going to hear me?
Well, it's not her. I'm afraid of Abby. She's scary. So
you're saying you got into it.
First of all, guess what else happened? Abby turned 18 this week.
I know. I can't even handle it.
So now she's like a grown up, and she thinks she's
going to beat you up.
She thinks she's grown up too, which is.
Is she giving you the dirtiest looks right now?
No, I don't even know where she is. I'm just afraid she's going to come in here and yell at me. But she called the other day and she was like, "Dad, how do you know how many gallons to put in the gas tank?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, how many gallons does your car take?" And I was like, "I don't understand the question." She's like, "Well, I'm trying to fill it up, but I don't know." And I'm like, "Babe, you just hold the handle until it pops."
Yeah.
And then she started yelling at me because I hadn't taught her that already. I was like, Jesus, I can't win for losing. Anyway.
Yeah. Go back to the
we got into a shouting match the other day, and I heard myself out loud say things that I didn't mean. Mm-hmm. Like I literally said horrible, horrible things that had no basis in my actual feeling or reality or truth. Mm-hmm. And I was stunned. It was almost like I punched myself in the chest.
Somebody should have.
Well, and I was just like, wait a second, what is happening right now? And it was the first time I sort of in real time, in the moment, caught like what flooding will do to you.
Yeah.
And I literally just stopped and I said, hold on. Oh, I know what happened. Rebecca said, "I can't believe you just said that. That's the meanest thing I've ever heard." And I literally stopped myself and said, hold on a second. Hold on. I am definitely flooded, and I definitely did not mean that. That is not a thing that I think we need to hang on to, or that you need to carry around for the next 20 years, so that you can throw it back. Or that we need
to continue having this conversation.
Yeah, or okay, but then I go into clients, and same thing happens, which is basically the wife in this case says, "Oh, but you said," and it was something really mean, and I immediately had empathy for him in this case, because I was like, I know exactly what happened. Of course he didn't mean that, but she's been hanging on to it for 10 years, you know? And so it just made me want to dive into it a little bit, because I think navigating conflict has so many different little twists and turns and tributaries. Like maybe there's this one through line called the river, but then there's all these little offshoots that sometimes can get us distracted. And I think getting flooded is one of them. And so I'm interested in talking about what does that mean, and how do we navigate that?
The thing that comes to mind, though, is in my relationship, I mean, it's been a long time. So every couple's a little bit different. And as you're talking to, listening to Zach, you might be thinking kind of how I'm thinking, which is I don't get into shouting matches. I have not been emotionally flooded in my relationship since I was about 21 years old, which has been a little while. It's been like 3 years. And that was funny. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's funny that you're calling it a relationship when you were only 21 years old.
It was a relationship. I was engaged. You get to be engaged at that age. I was engaged. All right. Well, so I haven't been emotionally flooded, but you might know what it feels like to be emotionally flooded behind the wheel of your car, or you might know what it feels like to be emotionally flooded when you are, like desperately trying to put your kid to sleep for a nap because you had 4 glasses of wine the night before and you need to sleep your hangover off and you need to get the laundry done and you need to, like, all these things, and all you want is for something to go your way and it's just not going your way. I actually got emotionally flooded. I'll tell you, this was not a proud moment, at like an AT&T store when we were there for 4 hours trying to switch our plans over. Literally 4 hours. I walked across to a Fred Meyer. I grabbed a beer. I went and I sat in my minivan and I was like, I'm done. I know that this is not the way that a lot of people think is a healthy coping mechanism. And I'm a flawed human being. But at that moment, that's what I needed to do for myself. And
as long as you're in your feasting period, I think you're fine. I think you can have a glass of beer in your minivan. Let's be clear about something though. Like flooding doesn't necessarily mean you got big and loud. It just means you got overwhelmed internally. Like I had this, when you attempt to become a certified Gottman therapist, you have to prove that you know what you're doing on videotape. And one of the things you have to prove is that you can handle flooding in your office. And so I had a couple that I had. Did I tell you this story? I'm sure I did. The couple that I used to do the flooding exercise, I picked them because she was kind of histrionic. She was all over the place. She would get big. She would get loud. She would wave her hands. She would cry. She would, and he was like flat. I mean, just no affect at all. Super flat affect. He was a guy who regularly used marijuana to help him calm down. He played some version of professional poker, and she was mostly a stay-at-home mom who just had a lot on her plate and was constantly trying to mitigate that. Anyway, I did the flooding exercise with them. I was 100% sure that she was flooded. And that was where I was going to get my result because they were in the middle of something pretty thick. What astounded me was when we took their pulse, which is part of the way that you measure diffuse physiological arousal, she was like at a 78. Right. And he was like at 112. But he could not have appeared more calm. He could not have appeared more like he had it together because he had all this practice stuffing down his, but he was furious on the inside, and it amazed me. So you can't just assume that it's observable behavior. Sometimes it's more like, well, you can't assume it's externally observable behavior. Although I do think those of us who recognize this tendency need to pay attention to what it is inside of us that signals flooding or signals arousal.
I want to just tear this apart just a little bit so that our listeners can kind of understand what you were talking about. So as a therapist, one of the things that we're looking for is when you're going into diffuse physiological arousal, you're emotionally flooding. And when you emotionally flood, your body triggers this like cascade of hormones throughout your body. So it's triggering cortisol and adrenaline, and it's essentially like getting you prepared to fight or flight. And
the new one, which is freeze.
Or freeze, exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't know if you've ever done this, but I often will find that couples, kind of like what you were talking about, where one couple gets kind of big, like they escalate and it's very visible. It's very external. Like they're crying, their voice is loud, they're standing up, they're pacing the room. Like
they're cursing, they're saying things they don't mean.
Yes. So it's very visual. And what I find is sometimes when you're paired with someone who gets really big, the tendency of the other partner is not to match that. It's like, it's almost like they have this idea in their head that if I just sort of I retreat internally and I kind of shut down a little bit, or I get really quiet and I get really calm, then maybe I will help to counterbalance my partner escalating. And it's almost like this attempt to sort of manage the dynamic in the room with this other partner. And oh man, it's really hard because the partner who's escalated, they hate it. They don't want their partner to be the logical one and to be the one that's calm and to be the one who's talking really quiet and is like trying to stick with the facts. And that only makes them escalate more. And I know that there's listeners right now that are like, yes, that's me. That's my relationship. I'm the escalator and I hate it when my partner gets so logical. Anyway, I see that dynamic a lot. And I think what you were just saying is that you can't judge a book by its cover. Just because your partner is calm, cool,
unless it's
collected.
Catcher in the Rye.
What?
Unless it's Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye, you can judge by its cover because it's got one of the greatest covers of all time.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Catcher in the Rye, that's where my son's name came from, right? Like,
sure.
Holden.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, that was a question mark.
Oh, no. What you should say is Catcher in the Rye. Yeah, love that book. That's why we named Holden.
Holden Caulfield.
Yeah,
Got it.
Yeah.
No, that's not why. It was actually after a snow apparel company.
Hey, there's something, I thought about that the other day. I was thinking, Rebecca asked me if you guys were finished having children. And I was like, I'm pretty sure. And then I went, yeah, Holden, I wonder what that name is. I had that thought like today. Have you ever had this thing where like somebody says something? Oh, you were describing it with the American president. But you like say something and then like something is like the exact same and it's like right near you. Or like I'm thinking the word, I'm thinking about writing a book and then like somebody on TV will be like, I just wrote a book. Have you ever had that happen? Like it's
almost like a deja vu, but it's not deja vu. It's like, I don't know.
There's a name for it. It's the thing that happens when you buy a car and then all of a sudden you see that car everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. Confirmation bias? No,
I'm going to find it though. Or somebody's going to find it. Somebody's going to find it and send it to us because they like to stalk us and do research and then.
You could be the key to helping change lives. Join a clinical trial with Nucleus Network in Minneapolis and be a part of groundbreaking research. Nucleus Network has been conducting clinical research studies for over 15 years. Right now, Nucleus Network is looking for people with moderate to severe kidney impairment to participate in their upcoming clinical studies. If eligible, your participation could help advance research of investigational medications that are being developed to treat a variety of medical conditions. Nucleus Network is offering compensation ranging from $2,000 to $7,000 for study participation time. If you or someone you know has kidney disease, check your eligibility for Nucleus Network's upcoming studies now at nucleusnetwork.com. Your participation matters. Learn more about Nucleus at nucleusnetwork.com. Again, nucleusnetwork.com.
That's what.
All right.
Can you help us out?
Okay. So we have to circle back to flooding and how it's showing up in the relationship and how it's not helpful to the relationship.
So if I'm doing strictly education right now, what I think I want to say is, cracking this code is a really big part of learning how to crack the conflict code. It's not that flooding is always present, but when it is, it needs your attention. And the reality is if one or both of you are flooded or one or both of you are sort of no longer in your right minds, then that conversation is going to go poorly. It just is. And so it doesn't make any sense to continue having it unless and until one or both of you can kind of come back to center. And that's where I think learning how to, I mean, I'll say for me, what happened to me in the kitchen when I was like, hold on a second, I know exactly what's happening. I'm flooded. I didn't mean that. That does come from years and years and years of practice. Practice observing.
Which I love, by the way, is that as a therapist, as someone who is aware of flooding, years of practice of identifying flooding in yourself and your relationship, is that you still flood. Like this is not something that is like preventable on your side.
That's a good point.
It's still going to happen. You might flood less often, but what you're saying, and what I think I hear you saying is that it's most important to identify when it's happening, not necessarily the prevention of it.
Yeah, not necessarily to keep it from happening. Although I do think that there is some merit to that, and I think that's where like learning how to meditate or pray or breathe or run or do yoga or I don't know. There's all kinds of ways that you can calm your mind, but or at least prepare your mind, particularly if you're already in a high conflict relationship, or you can look at it right now and go, "Oh, I know this happens. I can see the pattern." Like, why not get preemptive about it? But if it does happen in the moment, I do think there's some work that you can do to mitigate it. And that's something that I'm interested in thinking about too. I had a guy once who was talking to me about wisdom. He described wisdom as putting a pause between opportunity and action. So, like, if somebody comes and knocks on your door and says, "Hey, I've got this Ferrari out here that I'll sell you for, $10,000. It's not wise to go, yep, here's $10,000, right? The wisdom is putting a pause in between the opportunity, the Ferrari, and the action, which is the purchase, right? And I think the more space you can put in there, the more you can go, wait a second, is this a good deal? Hey, where did this Ferrari come from? Wait, $10,000, that sounds kind of sketchy. I don't even have $10,000. Like all of a sudden I'm exercising wisdom, right? And I think this model has actually been really helpful for me, especially with clients when we do get into conversations around flooding, because they're like, well, how do I not respond? And I think it's just exactly that. Like, let's call it emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is putting a pause between the impulse and the response, right? So I have an impulse to say something terrible,
right?
To my wife about my kids, perhaps. Well, emotional intelligence is for me to pause long enough to put a gap between that impulse, which may be coming from a very real place of desire for justice or being provoked or, just, being sad. But then the action itself needs a window, right? It needs a window of like anticipation or a window of judgment. Like, is this the right action? And in my case, there was no pause. And so I just blurted this thing out, and then, but then
you could immediately tell. You were like, wow, I can hear myself. I'm for a moment, it was like you were lucid.
Well, for a moment I was lucid, but I was also thinking about clients, and I was thinking about like the very real possibility that Rebecca had to tuck that comment into her belt and keep it there until she was ready to pull it out again, which could have been a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, because I hear people in my office do it all the time. They pull out this thing from a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it breaks my heart because I'm like, wait a second, 10 years ago, somebody said this in a heat of a moment in your kitchen, and you're still carrying it around as a wound in your relationship. Like, that's really awful. Like, I'm really sorry about that. And could it have been solved by the guy or the girl saying, hold on a second, I'm flooded. That came from a totally unconscious, unreal, untrue place. Let's please expunge it from the record. It is not at all what I am trying to communicate. I'm trying to communicate that I'm angry and upset. Yeah. But I use this really terrible thing to do it. Right. I think there's a little bit, so I guess it comes back to this idea of putting a pause between the impulse and the response. Right. Yeah. And the longer that pause, probably the more effective your response is going to be. Yeah. A couple of things that come to mind is this idea of two people that get together and have very different family of origin stories of how they did conflict growing up. And it's like, I've heard lots of people that said, there was never a raised voice in my family. I never actually saw my parents do conflict. I wasn't aware of any conflict growing up. And then there's other people, and it's like their household did conflict by raising their voice, sort of like getting into sort of tussles, if you will, had like really sharp, quick, fast quarrels, and then it was done and over with. And so when you're saying putting a pause, to me, that's like recognition of being able to say, hey, I know that my family of origin did conflict this way, where we raised our voices. We said things we didn't mean, we got flooded, but it was done and over with. And then we could move on. And to me, it's like the pause is, it might feel okay for you to raise your voice, but it's not okay to your partner. And I think that needs to be a discussion between the two of you of, how are we doing conflict? Like, what is our threshold that we are willing to tolerate as far as healthy conflict in our relationship, and coming up with your own script? Because even though you might be most comfortable with raising your voice, and you may be most comfortable kind of diving in, hashing it out, saying what you want to say, need to say, and is reactive, like getting reactive like you used to, I do think it's important for two people to be able to say, hey, this is not the family of origin. Like, we're not taking this old script of what we grew up with. We need to create our own script of what we want conflict to look like. And for some people, it might be, like sitting down and talking things out in the presence of children. It might be talking things out, late at night, having long everybody does conflict differently. And I think you and I just shared how differently you and Rebecca do conflict versus Ryan and I, because I told you this morning, my husband was hurt by something, and it was literally a 10-second conversation. He shared with me what he was hurt about. I acknowledged it. I said, wow, you know what? I'm sorry. I probably should have, thought this through, and I'm sorry that I impacted you. And it was done and over with. And that's how most things go. But well, just to that point, I think what you're describing is this idea that there are different agreements that families make. And in the one case, you might have a family that says, oh yeah, we're totally cool with just like revving up, burning real hot for a second, saying
Right.
stuff that we don't mean, and then walking away
Mhm.
as if it's just ingrained culturally. And that can be
Right.
fine for some people. Like,
Yeah.
I know plenty of couples like that. They tell each other to F off all the time. And like, that's just part of their style. Right. However,
Right.
in some marriages, to say F off is like a deal breaker, right? It's a real violation, but that's the absence of
Mhm.
agreement. It's not the absence of appropriate words, right? It's that we didn't do this. So I will have this conversation all the time, which is whenever anyone says, well, in my family, it was like this. I'm like, sorry, that's not a prescription. That's a
Right.
reference point.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can use the reference point to sort of help you understand where you're headed and where you're going, but it's not a prescription for, okay, when I get married, I get to behave like my family did, because
Mhm.
the other person brings their family into it too. And now there's a third brand new family that needs to come up with its
Right.
own agreements.
Yeah. So I call it the rules of engagement. Like, hey, like, let's just talk about this. How do you want conflict to look in your relationship? Is it okay to call each other, names? No. Is it okay for you to raise your voice? Yes. Is it okay to get angry and show that you're angry? Yes. Is it okay to get up, like stand up? No. Because when you stand up, that triggers me and makes me feel like there's a power differential. Okay. So like going through and actually talking about like, hey, when we have conflict, what are the rules of engagement that work for both of us? And if you are then breaking your rules of engagement, that's probably a pretty good indicator that one of you is flooded, because now you're not thinking
That's
logically.
two good points
Now
in
you're
one
like,
podcast.
yeah.
That's nice.
Oh, thanks. Way to bring it back full circle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other piece, people are like, okay, fine. Well, what do we do? I think that, kind of the prescription that at least comes out of the Gottman method, the one that we are familiar with, is this idea that when flooding is present, it's going to take some time to reset or re-level. And the prescription is at least 20 minutes, not more than 24 hours. So, like, I think when it's present and it's in the way, it's perfectly fair and maybe even right and good and responsible for someone to go, you know what, we ought to just park this and come back to it later.
Yeah.
Of course, the complaint I hear most often is that if that does happen, it doesn't happen kindly or politely. It's more like, I'm out of here, forget this, or, But then the other piece is this complaint, which I'm sure you've heard, which is, okay, yeah, sure. We take breaks all the time. We just never come back to it. Or he never comes back to it, or she never comes back to it. So it becomes this ongoing issue that doesn't ever get a place to kind of land. And so I think if you're going to take flooding seriously, certainly there's the personal internal part where I recognize what's going on inside of me, and I try to achieve this pause between impulse and response. But then there's also the collective, sort of relational part, which is one of our strategies here has to be that we know how to take a break. We know how to walk away for at least 20 minutes, not more than 24 hours. But if one of you is going to suggest that we walk away, that person is now on the hook for coming back. And I think that there's something about closing the loop that really does help mitigate this idea that 10 years from now, I'm going to pull this comment out, or I'm going to pull this moment out.
Right.
And I'm going to make sure that you hear about it, because I'm still thinking about it.
Right.
Which I think, again, is it's just terrible. It's terrible that we are still thinking about what may have been incidental, emotionally led actions or words that, frankly, like, I don't know if I would have remembered it.
Yeah.
Saying
well,
it,
and I think, okay, so in this particular example, there are some people that, yes, it absolutely, that is a part of who they are. They remember things that were said, the way that it struck a chord with them, it resonates, it sticks around, and it's a wound, a literal wound. And I don't think in these relationships, if you're someone who's in a relationship with, I would say, someone who's sensitive, where these words do hurt, they stick around for years and years and years, and you are able to just kind of like move on, brush it off. You don't think about it. It didn't hurt you. I really hope that you are sensitive to the fact that like this is a legitimate wound to them. And even though you don't have the same experience and it's not something that weighs you down, not to be critical of your partner when it does weigh them down, because it is a real thing. I had a client yesterday that I love. He was sharing some information from his individual therapist. And he said, there was a father and a son. You've probably heard of this. And
this
the
sounds
father
like
was
a joke. Here we go.
No, it's not. It's not a joke. It's not a joke.
Walked into the bar. And the bartender said,
father and a son. And basically, it has something to do with like every time, the son does something wrong, the punishment is for the son to go out and he puts a nail into the fence. And so over time, the son is, putting a nail into a fence, And eventually the son decides, or the father decides like, hey, you've corrected your old patterns and you've moved on and you're doing things right. And so there's no longer punishment. Now you can go and you can take the nails out of the fence. And what ends up happening is that the son realizes that the fence now has all of these holes in the fence, and it's weakened the fence over time, and there's no way to fill these holes. And I just think that that's an important thing to recognize, that every time you say something hurtful to your partner, maybe even, and most of the time we say these hurtful things when we are flooded, when we are emotionally triggered to the place where we're feeling overwhelmed and saying things that we regret, is that you might regret them, your partner might forgive you, but the holes are always there. They will always remain as these small wounds. And over time, 1 or 2 wounds may not be the biggest deal, but if you let flooding continue in your relationship and you continue to say these hurtful things, over time, the entire wall is covered in walls or in holes. So I don't know, I'm going to have to look up that story. I feel like it's something that's probably taught in churches. What do you say we land this plane? Actually, here's one thing I wanted to mention.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember our video series? We do an entire piece on flooding, emotional flooding and repair in relationships. Yeah. It's called Marriage in Motion. It's a video series for couples. It's 16 videos with corresponding activity sheets. And so for couples that have wanted to focus on their relationship, really creating motion in the relationship this year, that would be a really excellent way to just kind of dive in.
New Year's resolution.
Like a New Year's resolution, that we're going to focus on the marriage. We don't necessarily want to go to couples therapy, but we're willing to swap out our Netflix for, some videos to watch of Zach and Laura looking super handsome and lean back in the day, telling us more helpful tips about the relationship that you can find on Marriage Therapy Radio.
Do you have New Year's resolutions? Did we talk about this already? I think we did.
Yeah. Right now I'm super focused on a new way of eating. If you had listened to my solo podcast that I recorded for last week, you would notice that there's a lot of focus around creating some new habits around eating and exercise. And I'm really focused on it right now. I think that it's a major component of me getting back to who I am as an individual. Because you've always known me as a like athletic person in shape.
Athletic-ish, yeah. Sorry.
You used to have muscles for days.
You're athletic.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have an intention this year?
Well, I'm just trying to get back to like feeling at home in my brain and my body. So I wasted a lot of time in 2020 caring about things that didn't matter and focusing on behavior that wasn't healthy. So now I'm intermittent fasting, and I'm drinking a lot of water, and I started another flossing streak.
Whoa, heyo, back to oral hygiene.
I know. It's been a couple of years, but I'm determined to break my record, which I think is, I have to go check, but it's something like 187 days or something.
You went a long time.
Yeah. No, but mostly I'm just, chilling, trying not to take myself too seriously. So.
Yeah. Well, if you want to take me more seriously, I would appreciate that.
Nah.
Hey, I'll see you bright and early next Thursday so we can record our next podcast.
Well, we can negotiate terms over the next week. But hey, if this is your first time, thank you for listening, and go back and check out some of the episodes that we already have. You can go to Marriage Therapy.
Go back to number 1 and go to marriagetherapyradio.com.
Although I did want to talk about skydiving today, and I think number 2 or 3 or 4 is how to skydive, which would be a good companion episode. But it's like 3 years ago. Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, actually, because we talk a lot about flooding, and it's been 3 years since we've talked about it. So go back and listen to Zach talking about skydiving and the correlation to flooding. Hey, I want to go now. I got to go run.
Well, you got stuff to do?
I have stuff to do.
Okay. All right.
Adios. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Marriage Therapy Radio. Hey, I mentioned it, and I'm actually pretty serious that if this topic was interesting to you, you think that, hey, flooding does happen in my relationships, and I have put holes in the wall. then I think it's probably a good point to check out our video series for couples. It's called Marriage in Motion. You can find it on our website, marriagetherapyradio.com. There's a tab at the top that says products. And if you scroll down, you'll find the video series. I think we have it on there for an incredible deal. It's literally like 16 sessions that you'd be doing with a couples therapist, with Zach and I teaching you, and then having you work through exercises with your partner. And it's for less than the price of 2 sessions with Zach and myself. So check it out. Thank you for all of your time and your attention, making your relationship better today than it was yesterday.
You could be the key to helping change lives. Join a clinical trial with Nucleus Network in Minneapolis and be a part of groundbreaking research. Nucleus Network has been conducting clinical research studies for over 15 years. Right now, Nucleus Network is looking for people with moderate to severe kidney impairment to participate in their upcoming clinical studies. If eligible, your participation could help advance research of investigational medications that are being developed to treat a variety of medical conditions. Nucleus Network is offering compensation ranging from $2,000 to $7,000 for study participation time. If you or someone you know has kidney disease, check your eligibility for Nucleus Network's upcoming studies now at nucleusnetwork.com. Your participation matters. Learn more about Nucleus at nucleusnetwork.com. Again, nucleusnetwork.com.